Hello there and good morning scrumptious rabbits. I hope you had a good day because I am about to ruin it. How? You may ask. Well, today I will show you how to make a PBR shader for your vrchat avatar. How is that bad you say? I don't know, I just like to be evil. If you are very new to this, don't worry, I will make it as understandable as possible. First of all, we will create a shader on our Unity project. Unity provides us with a template already. If you feel daring today, you can write it from a blank file, but it will bring you to the same template, so it's not useful. Now when you open the shader you created, you will find this. As I said some time ago, the shader has two data structures and two programs by default. You can get to having three of both, but that's something I will leave for another day. We will first use our properties. The main texture is already declared, so we will just need to declare the metallic gloss map, the normal map, and the emission map. These are the base textures used for physics-based shading. First, the metallic texture. Its property name will be metallic gloss map, and its default color will be black. In the standard shader it is white because that way you can vary the values without using a texture. The red channel of this texture will be the metalness, 0 is not metallic and 1 being fully metallic. Then the alpha channel will be the smoothness, 0 being fully rough and 1 being as reflective as a mirror. Then the normal map, its name will be bump map, with its default color being bump. The texture contains the normal deviation normalized into a range from 0 to 1. That's why the default color doesn't look completely blue, so if you decode it back into a -1 to 1 range, it will face the z-axis only, meaning that the normal won't be deviated from its original angle. That sounds kind of complex, but it's not. It shortens down to a texture that makes what would be the light rays to bounce to a different direction. And finally, the emission map. This one is the most simple. It just represents the color that is not affected by lighting or emits it. Its name will be emission map and its default color will be black. And that's how our properties section will look like. You can obviously put as many parameters as you want, after all it's your custom shader. Now for the fun part, the shader itself. To start, let's add the forward lighting tag. This will make the pass received the necessary light parameters. Let me shortly explain what is forward rendering. You can skip it to go to the next step directly. There are 3 available render paths: vertex lit, deferred, and forward. Actually there's 4, but the 4th one is just deferred for lights only. Vertex lit renders the entire lighting on the vertex shader. That means that it won't have things such as normal maps, cube map reflections, shadows, and other things that would need to be rendered on the fragment shader. Deferred is the most functional and dynamic, but it's quite performance heavy compared to other rendering paths. 2 examples for games that use deferred rendering are Minecraft and any indie horror game made on Unreal Engine. What it does is first render the color, specular data with roughness, normals, and the shaders result as render targets or textures which you can use later to do stuff like screen space ambient occlusion, screen space reflections, blurring or screen space ray tracing. Yes, you can do ray tracing. Better said, yes. That's how Unreal Engine's lumen lighting works. You can see it on a game like the recent Garten of Banban Fang game, Garten of Banban Reincarnated, by Splendid Goose. Unique Geese I meant, my bad. You'll see why. As I said before, it has a very strong performance impact. But to give credit, it was made by one only person, with 0 experience, while on university, and it took a single week. And for that I say that you impressed me a lot. Keep advancing on your game, I know you have a lot of potential scrumptious goose. And finally, the magic render path. Well, not magic, but it's my favorite, because it's the one that we are going to use. Forward rendering, in difference of deferred, this one has to be rendered all at once on a single render target, also no post effects. And unlike vertex lit, you can do calculations wherever you want. Okay, no more explanations. Now we jump to the CG program, and after the pragmas we declare our properties. In this case it's 4 textures. You can declare them one by one or all of them at once, it doesn't matter. And now let's construct our structures. First one will be the mesh data, or as the template says, app data. We already have our vertex position and UV coordinates, so we just need to add a float 3 as the vertex normal and a float 4 for the tangent. The normal will be needed for the lighting and normal map, and the tangent will be needed only for the normal map. I don't think we need anything else, so let's go now to the vertex to fragment structure. This one has the screen space vertex position, the UV coordinates, and the fog coordinates already declared. If you are wondering, the template uses fog by default because, since on forward rendering you have to render the shader in one shot, that means it will draw to only one buffer and won't save any data other than the color result. You'll also have to render the fog on the same stage. So if you don't want the shader to be affected by fog, you can remove these lines. Now let's write what data we will need on the fragment program. First, the world position. In this video it won't be used, but on the next PBR shader tutorial, where we will advance more, it will be necessary. Next, the view direction, that will be needed for the reflection vector, and finally the tangent space matrix, that we will use for the normal maps. Something you need to know is that this matrix will use 3 text chord slots, so if you want to declare any other new output vector, you have to skip 2 text chord slots. After that you will see these declarations. Remove the main texture declaration since we already declared them above. Keep the ST declaration though. This one contains a vector with its corresponding textures scale and offset, which will be used later. Now to the vertex shader. In here the vertex screen position, fog coordinates and UV coordinates are already calculated. So let's start with the world position. This one is simple. Multiply the vertex position by the object to world matrix. This matrix will rotate and scale the values so it aligns with the world. Now for the view direction, this one is the world position offset by the camera location, which later we will normalize since it's a direction, not a position. The tangent space is a bit more complex. We could use the functions included on Unity CG, but since normalizing vectors on the vertex shader will give less precise values because of linear interpolation, we will have to do it on a different way. Starting with the world space normal. Depending on the define that specifies if its scale it's uniform, we'll transform it to world space as we did with the world position, or we will transform it by the inverse, don't ask me why. Then the world space tangent, which is the direction as what your XUV coordinates are looking at. That is in case of Unity, since tangents can be calculated in different ways and some don't rely on UV coordinates. This one just need to be transformed to world space the same way we did before. And finally, the bitangent or binormal, that's also the world direction the YUV coordinates are looking at. Since we know the y-axis is relative to the x-axis, you'll just need to cross both previous vectors, normalized, and multiply them by the w-axis of the tangent along with the w-axis of the world space transform parameters, and that is all for the vertex shader. Now let's get real. Going to the fragment shader, we will find this. The fragment shader samples the main texture on a variable, applies fog, and outputs it to the target buffer, which in case of forward rendering, there's only one target buffer. To keep things in order, we will start by sampling the textures. The main texture is already declared, so let's add the normal map, the metallic gloss map, and the emission map. All will use the same UV coordinates, which means the tiling and offset for all textures will rely on the main textures only. Now for the vectors. First we normalize the vectors we skipped from normalizing on the vertex shader, so the view direction, the world normal and world tangent. The bitangent is already normalized, so we don't need to do it with this one. Then create a new vector which will be the world space normal affected by the normal map. Its value will be the unpacked normal multiplied by the tangent space matrix. Remember to always use this function to multiply matrices on Shader Lab. Finally add two more float-3 vectors, one being the reflection vector, which is the inverse view direction reflected by the world normal, that will be used for the cube map reflections, and the other one being the half vector which is the view direction plus the light direction normalized. We will use this one for specular highlights, and also create a fixed 4 variable for the shader result, which its value will start with the main texture. Now let's do the lighting. First the ambient light. Unity CG has a function that samples it directly. If you want you can do it yourself as I showed on my previous video. In here I'll just sample it from the function. Remember that you have to input a 4-axis vector where the W channel has to be 1, so it samples the base ambient color. And now the directional light. I will use the Lambert lighting model, which is the most simple one. It's the dot product between the light direction and world normal, saturate it so it doesn't give values out of range and then multiply it by Okay, I might have missed one thing, and that is that you also have to declare the light color if you haven't included lighting.cg inc. I am sorry, I will do worse. Multiply the lighting to the result and done. So yeah, that is the whole diffuse lighting for this shader. Now to the cube map reflections. First we need the smoothness, which is the alpha channel of the metallic map. You create a float variable for the roughness which is the inverted smoothness, then on a new float variable apply the formula which adjusts it for a better MIP level ramp. Another thing we need is the number of MIPs the cube map has, so the roughness goes from the highest level of detail to the lowest. This value will be Unity Spec Cube LOD steps, which I don't trust a lot, so in the future I will tell you how to do a workaround for it. Don't forget to include this file to get the number of MIPs. Now to the main part. Create a new fixed 4 variable and sample the cube map as it shows. This function samples the texture with its sampler. Unity_spec cube 0 is the name of the reflection cube map. Reflection is the reflection coordinates we wrote on the upper section of the fragment shader, and ref roughness is the MIP roughness we wrote just now. And after that, we will adjust the values using the decode HDR function that comes from Unity CG. The name of the decode instructions is the cube map name followed by _HDR. Now how do we mix it with the result? We know that a light rays bouncing on a metallic surface get filtered out by the color of the surface, so the metallic part will be the reflection cube map multiplied by the main texture, which is the color of the surface. And light rays bouncing on a dielectric or specular surface get partially reflected from the surface and the other part of the rays gets scattered, creating this shading that combines diffuse lighting and glossy reflections. Its vector for the reflective surface can be found on Unity CG as Unity_color space dielectric spec. So the specular part will be the result plus the reflections multiplied by the dielectric factor. Now that we know which result is which, we just need to mix it depending of the metallic factor, which is the red channel of the metallic map. So the result will be a lerp with 0 being specular, 1 being metallic, and the factor being the red channel of the metallic map. Now let's do the last step for PBR shading, specular highlights. We will use a simple specular model, this being the Blinfong model. It will be a bit complex though, so let me explain step by step. First we need the dot products of the normal and view direction, the normal and half direction, and the normal with the light direction. Then after that we will create 3 float variables, one for the specular power, another for the speculate term and another for the visibility term. First the specular power. This is the power we will raise the normal half dot product to. We will reuse this value to avoid creating extra variables. First we raise the roughness to the power of 2 by multiplying it by itself. Then we do it again with the result. We limit the minimum value to 0.0001, then divide 2 by this result, and finally subtract 2 to the result. Then we will again limit the minimum value to 0.0001 to make sure we don't get excessive values. Good. Now let's do the specular term. This is the main specular result. We will use it to first calculate the factor that changes the specular intensity depending on how concentrated it is, also known as energy conservation. Then do the specular highlight itself, which is the saturated normal half dot product raised to the power of the specular power variable, which will then be multiplied by the factor we wrote above. Now the visibility term. We will reuse this one too because yes. First we will make the factor which is the roughness multiplied by this very long number which I don't want to know why is it that long. Then we will interpolate both the normal light dot and normal view dot to 1 depending on that factor, and we will multiply the results. And for the last step, divide 1 by the squared result plus 0.00001, again to avoid excessive numbers. Then multiply it by 0.25 and we should be done with the numbers for specular highlights. And now create a fixed 3 variable for your specular highlights result, which is the specular term multiplied by the visibility term multiplied by the saturated normal light dot multiplied by the light color. And to combine it with the result we will treat it as the cube map reflections, multiplied by the main texture if it's metallic or multiplied by the dielectric factor if it's specular. So to make it simple we just multiply the specular result by a lerp between the dielectric factor and main texture depending of the metallicness, and then add this to the result's XYZ or RGB value. And now for the last step of all last centuries. Adding the emission. Yay, I didn't say emission was going to be hard. With that you finished the base pass. Now let's do a quick extra step. This is something very important for your shader, the shadow caster. This pass function is to make the shader visible to the depth buffer, that way you can do depth dependent functions like shadow casting, screen space ambient occlusion, depth of field, or any other depth effects. Since Unity is so nice to have a name for the shadow caster, we will use that one by writing use pass after our base pass and in quotations write the directory of the shader, which is just standard since it's not on any category. Then put a slash and write the name of the pass, which is shadow caster. Now let's see the result by putting completely unrelated PBR textures on my Nanichi avatar. First one, lava 006, wood floor 007, terracotta tiles 002, brick wall 14, leather padded 001, metal locker 001, and sci-fi floor 001. Pretty good for a forward rendered shader if you ask me. This video took me longer than I expected, but you finally survived to the end. Very cool. Here you have a boop. On my next shader tutorial I will explain how to make a toon shader. For now do whatever wacky things you want with what you have learned and don't forget that Funky's not this horrendous cowbell music you hear everywhere. Anyways, that's it for today, see ya.